Welcome, everybody. Are we gonna start pulling up the poll? Is it already live?
Yeah, we can pull it up while more people trickle in.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. We're gonna give folks a few more minutes and start around 12:20. So in the meantime, feel free to get comfortable, grab some water, whatever it is you need to do, use the restroom. We also have a poll that's live. So go ahead and fill that out, just a couple of really simple questions. And feel free to give an introduction in the chat if you feel comfortable. Some suggested things you can say, your name, where you're coming from, either work or location, or what brings you here, your pronouns, anything of that sort. So yeah, and we'll start in 4 minutes. Thanks for reminding us, Max. Happy Friday. Weekend's almost here. And it's Halloween. So we have these fun little backgrounds. I'm a big fan. If you have any fun Halloween plans, feel free to share those if you'd like in the chat. I think I'm carving a pumpkin tonight. So maybe I'll make it a coho pumpkin. Yeah, I'll think about it. Could always use more social media. For those just joining us, welcome. Just letting you know that this meeting's being recorded and we have a live poll going on. So feel free to answer those questions. It's just 2 really simple questions. Where you currently are in terms of profession or school, and then also how well you know the housing field. And feel free to be completely honest. We all come from different backgrounds with different levels of experience, and that's totally okay. And also some folks are introducing themselves in the chat. So if you would like to join, feel free as well. You can say what brings you here, your name, your pronouns, and anything else that you feel comfortable with. And we will start at 20. So probably like 30 seconds.
Go for it. I will be ending the poll in a minute.
Okay, for sure. So some ground rules for today. Welcome everybody again. If you could, please stay on mute unless you are speaking, and show your video if you're able to. We'd like to create a greater sense of community, but we also understand that everybody has different limitations, whether it's internet speed or family, some crazy shit going on in the background. Feel free to come off your camera if you're able to, but if you're not, that's totally understandable. And today we have a really simple agenda. We're just going to focus on having audience questions, as well as some questions that we've prepared for our guest today, Cory. And with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So COHO is an organization that is sponsored by Silicon Valley at Home. We are the coalition of housers, and we host events such as this Fireside Chat. And we've hosted several in the past as well. I highly encourage you to check us out. We're doing a lot of awesome work. And what our goal really is to bring folks together in the affordable housing ecosystem. And we have a lot of professionals and emerging professionals in our coalition from many different backgrounds. And we kind of just bring our skills, talents, and voices together. And it's a super awesome way for us to share ideas and also just further these conversations on affordable housing, which we know that we need so much of right now in the Bay Area. We're going to have the form put into the chat to subscribe to our newsletter. Our newsletter is a community effort. Each of us contributes from the coalition, and you can stay up to date on all of our different events, such as this fireside chat. And we also provide some other community updates and news as well. So I would highly encourage you to subscribe, and you'll just get the newsletter once in a while, something you can check out on your email. And the link is in the chat now. You can learn more about Coho. Thanks, Marissa. And you can also fill out the form to be subscribed to our newsletter. And like I said, we're a network of emerging leaders and new leaders, and we're focused on affordable housing. And we want to basically help provide that leadership development and professional development of our diverse South Bay, our community of housing practitioners in the industry, as well as industry partners. So like, for example, I'm Neil, I'm a member of Coho, he, him, his. I actually don't explicitly work in the housing industry. My daytime job is with working partnerships, where I'm a community organizer. But we understand that here at Coho, we all come from different backgrounds, and that we come together to form this awesome network. So we have here today Cory Wolbach. I also wanted to thank Dixie and Marissa on the Careers in Affordable Housing team within Coho, and Emily for being super awesome, supporting us and making this event possible. And just in general, special shout out to Emily, because Emily does so much. And I swear Emily is on 3 or 4 Zooms at the same time, has a system set up for that. But yes, Cory Wolbach is joining us today, and Cory is the Community Engagement Senior Associate at Silicon Valley at Home. Silicon Valley at Home, Cory works on state, regional, and local housing campaigns, and also supports SB at Home's Action Fund legislative program. Prior to joining SB at Home, Cory worked in and within government in multiple roles as an elected official, staffer, consultant, and advocate. Cory was on the Palo Alto City Council from 2015 to 2018, which is a remarkable feat to be elected as someone who's forward thinking on a lot of these different affordable housing issues, to be elected to the Palo Alto City Council. So shout outs for that. And during his tenure, he prioritized addressing the housing crisis through accessory dwelling unit liberalization. So thinking like ADUs or granny flats, small homes that people can build in their backyard to house extended family members or others who could use naturally more affordable housing options. And he also worked on zoning reform to make affordable housing easier to build and quicker to build, as well as tenant protection, because we know that our renters are extremely vulnerable here in the South Bay, with something like 51% rent burdened. So in addition to housing policy, he's also worked on initiatives relating to transportation, climate action, fair wages, civil liberties, and electoral reform. Cory has mentored numerous local candidates and their teams, sharing his lessons learned from his firsthand experience in politics and public service. Cory holds a BA in Political Science and International Relations from the University of California, San Diego. And when not working or volunteering, he enjoys exploring the region's neighborhoods, hiking trails, and back roads. Cory is a Silicon Valley native, committed to helping creating a more equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future, which we all really could use. Thank you for joining us today, Cory. And before we go ahead and get started with the conversation, could we go ahead and pull up the poll and see what we got from our participants? So we have a bunch of folks who are currently working in housing who are interested in learning more, even more about the industry. We do know that a lot of people are moving around in their jobs, so maybe it's part of that. Also current students, recent graduates, or currently working in a different field. We don't have any recent graduates, but we do have a current student as well joining us today, which is awesome. And for how well you know the housing field, we have a pretty good breadth of where people come from. So that's super awesome, and we can always learn more together. Great. Thanks for pulling up the poll. So Cory, if you could just start, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live currently, where you come from, and maybe like 3 words that describe you.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for the really nice introduction and thanks for having me. Nice to meet everybody. I know several of you. Some of you I might not have seen in person in a while, but really good to see and meet you all. So a little bit about me. As you mentioned, I grew up here. I actually moved to Palo Alto when I was 2. I grew up in Palo Alto in the 80s and the 90s when it was already a little bit more expensive, but nothing like it is today. After high school, I did not go to college right away. I worked private security mainly for several years, lived in Mountain View and San Jose for several years each. And then in my mid-late 20s, finally decided to actually go to college because I was always finding myself really frustrated by government and politics, and decided if I was going to complain so much, I better do something about it. So I went to community college down in LA at Santa Monica College, and then transferred to UC San Diego, studied political science, got involved with the college Dems at UC San Diego, and came back up here to start a new career working in government. I always thought like, oh, I might run for office someday, but I always figured it would be like further down the road when I was older, knew what I was doing. But after a couple of years being back in Palo Alto, and helping take care of aging parents, and seeing the challenges for people my generation and also people their generation looking for housing options, I started to realize just how bad the housing crisis was. And my focus hadn't really been on housing issues. I was interested in international relations and national politics, but the reality that I and my generation, my parents' generation, faced with the housing crisis made it harder and harder to ignore. A real turning point for me was a special election in 2013 in Palo Alto, when an affordable senior housing complex that had already been approved by the city council was overturned in a special election by voters who had forced it to the ballot. And that was a real inspiration for me to run for city council, because the conversation in my community was really shifting more and more against housing, even affordable housing. And I thought we needed to have an alternative voice that was willing to stand up and say that. And I didn't run until basically, we weren't very successful in recruiting other people with similar views to run. People were busy with life, raising their kids and their careers. And so I did it kind of reluctantly, but was able to get elected and to serve for a few years. After I was relieved by the voters of my duties after the first term, I worked for a startup for a while, and again, now I'm at Silicon Valley at home. 3 words to describe myself: idealist, realist, and pragmatist. I think those words are often played against each other. Are you a realist or are you a pragmatist? Are you idealistic or are you realistic? And I reject that false choice. I think that you can have strong ideals that guide you and guide your organization and the work that you do. I think you can be realistic about how much of those ideals are achievable in the real world and how much are achievable on a given timeline. And you can use that to set realistic goals, still driving towards that ideal. And I think you can be pragmatic about how to achieve those realistic goals. So that's my trio: idealist, realist, pragmatist.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really refreshing to hear, for sure, because definitely always being pragmatic versus being idealistic is seen as a false dichotomy. So appreciate you bringing that up. And if you could go back in time, just theoretically, that trajectory that you went through is very unique and awesome. But what would you have told younger you, I suppose?
Younger me back in high school, I would have said, do your homework more. That, if you care about something, put the work in and put it in now. Don't wait. And then after high school, same thing. You don't have to go to college and study political science in order to be an activist on an issue, or to get involved in some way in your local community or with a local political or advocacy group that is pushing for something you care about. It's not all or nothing. And I went from nothing to, jumping in the deep end. But yeah, I think that would have been a major change for me. Um, so that's some advice I would have given myself. Um, get involved where you can right now. And then I think being involved in things you care about. If you are interested in a career that has an intersection with your values, whether it's building affordable housing or in politics or in government, by being involved, you meet people and you learn things, and a lot of mentorship opportunities arise, and it becomes easier to find career paths and job options. So don't wait.
On those career paths and job options, for younger professionals, either emerging or thinking about going into their professional fields, if they want to get into housing advocacy, if they want to get into ensuring that they play a role in bringing more affordable housing options to the Bay Area, where should they start? What internships or volunteer opportunities would you recommend, or sort of best practices, I suppose, to network? Because it can be very difficult to get into. There's lots of technical language, and there's lots of confusing narratives, and just understanding how all of this works. Where would you start?
Anywhere. Embrace the fact that there is a learning curve, and people who have been working in housing for years or decades are always still learning too. We all come into housing at some point because it's interesting or painful or a necessity because we are a family who've been personally impacted. And so just embrace your entry point and your perspective, and just find a way in and find people to start talking to, and find people you feel comfortable asking questions of. I still very often am like, hey, I have a silly question. Maybe I don't understand this term that everybody's using. It must be a basic term. I don't know it. Can somebody help me out with the jargon? And I think that's really, really important because there's so many acronyms. There's so much jargon. But as a couple examples, I mean, you're all here with Coho. Coho's great. Short plug for SB at Home. We do a lot of cool stuff. Pay attention to what we're doing. I see people here from some of the YIMBY groups who do a lot of advocacy, and poke around on Twitter. Search for housing or YIMBY or Silicon Valley at Home or Coho on Twitter. San Jose Neighborhoods for All. There are so many ways to get plugged in. Just start.
Hello?
You're still there, Neil. We can hear you.
Oh, is Cory still there?
Yes.
Froze for me. Oh, okay. Sorry. I think
Sorry,
my
internet's, I think my internet's a bit choppy, so sorry about that.
Okay, well, it's one of our internets. I think I had a problem too. Awesome. Thank you for making that point as well. Really, that you can start anywhere, and I think people forget how over-encompassing really housing is. So maybe you come in from the perspective of zoning liberalization. So maybe you come in through sort of a more YIMBY perspective, or maybe you come in from more of a social justice field, or maybe you come in from more research standpoint, that there really are a lot of opportunities. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up for sure. Do we have any questions in the chat that we wanted to flag at the moment?
We don't have any questions yet, but if you have questions, we can either ask you to unmute or we can read them from the chat, whatever you all prefer, and we'll have opportunities throughout this event. So please gather your questions.
Great. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to be able to ask your question with your voice. And we actually do have a question in the chat for you, Cory. So we'd love to hear your opinion. As someone who worked with ADU policies in Palo Alto, how sustainable do you think ADUs are? It's a very broad question, but yeah.
environmentally sustainable or like fiscally sustainable?
Hmm. I guess in the Bay Area when we're thinking about ADUs, because ADUs are seen as a pretty critical part of this. Uh, in terms of equity, I suppose, how sustainable do you think they are? And so I think that
Mhm.
could be approached from a couple of perspectives. Maybe one, like the ADUs that you see being built and like how people live in them, and then also affordability, I suppose.
Yeah, good question. All right, so I have a lot of thoughts about ADUs because we worked on it a lot when I was on council. Um, One of the reasons we prioritized attacking ADUs is we thought it would be low-hanging fruit. We thought that would be, as far as zone reform and making housing more palatable and encouraging more housing to be built that would be more palatable so that we could overcome both opposition among my colleagues on the council and also opposition community that I referred to earlier. We thought ADUs would be the easy thing. A lot of people already had, family member or renter in their on the couch, in their guest room, in their garage, in an unofficial and not up to code ADU. So people were living like that, basically overcrowded, whether it's extended family or for a renter. And so we figured let's just make that legit. Let's make those units safe and have the dignity of your own space, give people that option, take it out of the black market, basically. It seemed like the right thing to do. Um, but it's a drop in the bucket, given the scale of the demand at every income level throughout, not just Palo Alto, but throughout Silicon Valley, throughout the region. ADUs are not going to like solve the problem on their own. The problem was so deep, so many years and decades in the making, and so multifaceted that it's one plank. So I think if somebody says, oh, this one policy change or this one housing type is the answer to the housing crisis, I encourage them to keep getting involved and keep learning more and keep talking to more people, because there is no silver bullet. There are all these things that we need to do. I'm sure you are all, or most of you are probably familiar with the idea of the 3 Ps, right? We need to produce a lot of housing at a bunch of different income levels. We need to preserve existing affordable housing, and we need to protect or empower renters to make sure that they aren't getting the short end of the stick.
Absolutely.
So I
And
guess
thank you.
those are some of my initial thoughts about ADUs. But like I said, I've a lot of thoughts. I could keep going for an hour just on that.
No, I think you summarized it very well in terms of the question and equity. Thank you to the person who asked that in the chat, and my small contribution to that, and in total agreement with you, is that I actually lived in an illegally converted ADU when I was a student at Berkeley. I mean, now it's legal, but at the time it was an illegal conversion, and yeah, just the living standard wasn't up to par. So I agree that it generally makes a lot more sense to move forward in a direction of having easy to build, legal, up to code ADUs. And I think that I would have probably had a better student experience if that were the case. So thank you for bringing that up. And for you, like, what does a work day look like? What is housing advocacy?
Every day is different. So I do a few different things at SV at Home. I think we all do because it's a small team, and we work hard, and we are we're an organization with diverse interests, right? We are very much a Big 10, all of the above organization, right? Our former executive director co-chaired the CASA process that was focused on all those 3 Ps. We really care about equity. We really care about environmental sustainability as it pertains to housing production, housing planning. And so, yeah, we all do a few different things. We have a 501c3, which is our main organization, right? Silicon Valley Home. We also have a 501c4, the Silicon Valley Home Action Fund. I do some work on both of those. A 501c3 or a C4, if you don't know, is just two different tax designations for different types of nonprofits. 501c3 is really supposed to be focused on the public good and can do a lot of education, can do a little bit of lobbying, can't do really political stuff. A 501c4 can do a lot more lobbying and can do a chunk of political and campaign stuff. So on our 501c3 side, I do a lot of networking, connecting with people, making sure that elected officials and community organizers know that we're here as a resource, and try to connect them with one another and keep them engaged, and make sure people are thinking about and talking about housing solutions, the housing problem, but also the housing solutions and opportunities. On the 501c4 side, the more direct advocacy and electoral stuff, we do a few things that I'm plugging into, and I've only been at SV at Home since April, so I'm still new-ish. But I think you mentioned earlier, we have a state legislative advocacy kind of work plan. There are definitely bills that we've supported or opposed, and so I help identify and talk about and actually advocate for or against those at the state level. And at the local level, we've been very involved in some ballot measures. We essentially ran in-house Measure E in San Jose back in 2020, and have had other ballot measures that we've taken a strong stance on and really helped push. And so that's something that we can do as an organization. And when it comes to candidates, although we've never endorsed candidates in the past, we definitely like to engage candidates and help the public understand where candidates stand by doing things like hosting forums where we can really shine a light on housing issues, get people on the record, and nudge candidates for office to prioritize housing and make clear to everybody what their positions are. I mean, ideally for us, everybody would come to our forums and answer all of our questions with enthusiasm on the same side as our positions. And if that's the result of a forum, that's still a success, because it gets everybody on the record saying they are going to do X, Y, and Z for housing. And then when they're in office, we can all remind them.
Great. Just a quick follow-up for that. With your work day. So in the Bay Area, especially the South Bay, we know there are a lot of electeds and candidates and neighbors too, who just viscerally are opposed to housing, and maybe they're open to affordable housing, but only if it's built in a way that doesn't really make it scalable or feasible. So in your role, seeing this from the C3, C4 perspective, and granted, you're still new at your job, but bringing in that Palo Alto experience, like how would you talk to these folks? What would be some of your stronger points? Maybe just like a top two.
Well, there's the what are the mechanisms we used to talk to them, right? Going to their meetings, meeting them where they're at, whether it's online or in person, I think is important. And then all the events that we host or involved in, or third-party groups like this that we participate in to just help spread the news about housing and talk about things. As far as the actual message, I think if there's 2 points, it's to talk about the reality, right? Be realistic about the problems we have and the history, but then also to talk about the solutions, right? So acknowledge the past and the present, and then acknowledge the near-term and long-term solutions and opportunities. So you're not just dwelling on what we've done wrong in the past, and not just dwelling on how dire things are, but shifting the focus towards the future. I tend to say, and to think it's good to start with values, and then collectively craft a vision that kind of reflects those values. And then when you get to talking about specific policies, it's much easier, because it's all in that frame, it's all in that context of these are just some policy ideas, some tools to make that vision a reality. And the vision is a reflection of values that we all share, right? So it instead of starting with a fight about a policy nuance, I think it's better to get everybody on the same page with some value discussion.
Great, thanks for that. So what's a fight or a victory in your years as an advocate, just to incentivize folks to this is a career path that I'm very interested in? What's something you're proud of?
So I think a recent one is actually a big deal. which was the passage of SB 9 in the state of California. Senate Bill 9 just was signed by the governor in September. You all may be familiar with it. Basically, it legalizes a lot split of a single family home. It also legalizes a duplex, and you could do both. So that means that if you have a home that is zoned by your city as exclusively just for one house, which is, we can talk about how problematic that is, and how it's rooted in a history of systemic and deliberate segregation, and how it impacts housing affordability. But single family, as it's called, exclusionary zoning is really bad. So now anywhere in California, if your city has zoned your house for just one home, one big home or small home, you can now split it in two and do two duplexes. So you could do 4 homes, or before you could only do one. I feel like this is the next step beyond ADUs, right? Where it's, again, not going to solve the problem, but it is a positive step in the right direction. And given the vociferous commitment by so many to defending single family zoning, to defending exclusionary zoning from any change, the fact that it was passed in the legislature and signed by the governor is a big deal. And in San Jose, a lot of us have been working really hard to support a similar measure called opportunity housing. And now most of the tough questions around opportunity housing have been addressed by the state. Not everything, but a lot of it. And so that makes the conversations in our local cities much easier. So I'm really appreciative of what happened at the state level. And I'm really proud of the advocacy work that we did at the SVA Home Action Fund to support that.
Absolutely. And I swear, like, I'm not making this up, but everything you're saying just is so personal to me. I live in a duplex that is on a single family lot. So if it was before SB 9, if it was rebuilt today, it would have to be basically a super large single family home. So yeah, that's really important for sure. We have a bunch of questions now that just sort of all came in.
Awesome.
So
all right, I'll try to keep my answers shorter so you can get through them all.
You're doing great. So what are the largest barriers to housing affordability in the Bay? I know there's so much competition to get funding. How do we increase that funding? Do politicians need to make it more of a priority to get funding for affordable housing, or is it more complex than that? So I guess that's a bunch of questions. Let's summarize it into one, which is like finances, funding. Do we, how do we, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll actually step back a little bit and suggest, like, there's a 3-part way to think about what it takes to build affordable housing that I've heard it at least once or twice that I like, which is, in order to do affordable housing, you need land, money, and political will, or dirt, dollars, and determination. So you really need all 3. And I think all 3 of those are major obstacles in the Bay Area. So anything you do to support any of those is good work. On funding, boy, this is probably the area where I'm actually the least well-versed, but it is really important. We need funding at every level. We've passed some measures locally, right? Measure A, countywide, Measure E I mentioned before, and City of San Jose. Those local measures are good. The state of California is investing more money. The budget this year was pretty good. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but there are some good numbers in the state of California compared to past budgets as far as what's being invested this year. And I need to check the news. Haven't checked it yet today much, but I know there's some optimistic signs, fingers crossed, about the federal Build Back Better, the economic package, or aka the reconciliation package. A lot of us have been enthusiastic about seeing some major investments federally in housing, just because the economic and fiscal power of the federal government can do things on a scale that we just cannot do at the local level. But there's also the challenge of just finding philanthropic funds or other sources. So yeah, in order to build affordable housing, for anyone who's anyone here who actually works in building affordable housing, you all know just how hard it is to piece together the money you need to afford the land here, which is so pricey.
Absolutely. And I know that we have a lot of folks on, so if anybody else wants to talk about affordability in the chat, feel free to, and funding mechanisms. And on that note, we now have a regional Bay Area housing fund. So hopefully that makes a big dent in that funding issue as well for financing our projects. Okay, we have some more questions in the chat. What skills do you think are important to cultivate for someone who wants to do affordable housing advocacy?
Patience mixed with strong determination. I mean, you need to be patient when dealing with people who might not have the same passion you do or the same knowledge base that you do. But yeah, I think that patience is going to be really important. Plus, things do take time, but we don't want to be complacent in how long things take. We want them to move faster. So really having that that passion and determination helps. And I'd say also discernment. Going back to an earlier conversation, some people who are skeptical or hesitant or opposed to some housing effort, some affordable housing effort, many of them are arguing in good faith, some are not. It took me a long time to realize that. Some people will never be won over, and they will waste your time, and they will seem like they're arguing in good faith, which makes it tempting to spend a lot of time with them. And it is hard to give pointers exactly on what to look for to figure out if somebody's arguing good faith or bad faith, or if maybe they think they're arguing good faith, but deep down, they're really not open to persuasion. One thing I will suggest is if the goalposts keep moving, that's a sign you might be in a time suck. So if somebody has an issue and you address that issue, and then they say, oh, well, what about this? You address that issue. And they say, well, what about this other thing? You address that thing. They say, oh, it's like, if your vocal points of opposition keep changing, it might be that the real issue is something else. And maybe they're not recognizing it themselves, so you don't need to get mad at them. They might not be lying. They might just not realize that their deeper reluctance or resistance is kind of rooted somewhere else. So yeah, passion, determination, discernment. There's three you can start with.
Thank you for sharing that. Another question, let's see. Double checking. Okay, so a question from the chat. There are many laws that serve to streamline. That just means to basically make it much faster to build housing. And that comes at a price for some folks. And it's an increasing feeling of alienation from our local governments, so the Palo Altos and the Cupertinos, but also many other cities in good faith too, who feel like they are being forced to do something from the state's standpoint. Your experience going from Palo Alto now to here to regional stuff, how does that experience help bridge the gap between the law and the need to engage locally?
I used to think that we would solve this problem locally. I used to think we could figure it out. I no longer have confidence in that. I now recognize that you need, when there's a major, broad, deep problem that lasts for years, it helps, and sometimes it's necessary for a higher level of government to step in and set some baseline standards. And you can think of a lot of other examples in history, right? Like Jim Crow wasn't ended locally. And as we were just talking about, ending single family zoning, although a couple of cities have done the right thing, ending single family zoning didn't happen locally in California, with a handful of exceptions. And given the scale of the problem and the urgency of the problem, I don't think we should just wait for the Palo Altos, the Cupertinos, sorry to pick on a couple of cities, but everywhere we can't, I don't think we can wait for every city to figure it out, especially when some are so diametrically opposed to change. In education, it's accepted that the state sets certain standards. And that doesn't mean that we don't have local school boards, and local school boards work isn't important. and the work of individual teachers. We're not saying work of individual teachers or principals isn't important, but there's some basic standards that are set at the state level. And I would, excuse me, I would suggest thinking about that as a point of comparison.
Absolutely. Yeah, the state sets standards for education, for wages. It kind of makes sense. I would agree with you that it should also work for housing. Great. Are there any other questions that I missed? My fellow chat moderators?
I don't see any other questions in the chat, but I'd love if someone was able to unmute and ask a question directly to Cory.
Yeah. Does anybody want to directly ask a question? Just feel free to raise your hand. Just do a quick scan. Okay, I will, if one pops up, like the next 30 seconds, we can give a call on them. But I guess to close us out, because we're pretty short on time here, we have like a couple more minutes before we make our closing remarks. What would you say, what resource would you recommend people go to after this to continue their fascination? What's next for them?
I'm going to make two plugs. One, obviously, for SB at Home, you can check out our website, and we've got a lot of resources there. And another is the Turner Center, TERNER, at UC Berkeley. So if I have to pick two, I think those would, you could do worse than to start with those two. But sorry, I'll also just say, like, use the human resources, talk to your friends, talk to other people, like grab a Zoom coffee or an in-person coffee if you feel comfortable, like with other people in Coho that you've never hung out with one-on-one. Trade ideas.
I have a question. This is Liz Gardner.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, great. This is a question about affordability, and I'm sorry I came in late. I was doing something else, but on a local level in Palo Alto, and I know, there's all these state bills, and I'm all for, all that happening. But what personally I'm up against is, the stigmatization of the Section 8 voucher. And it's kind of like, I don't know how to put it, the question succinctly, but you know how Palo Alto's doing these ADUs to help offset the lack of housing. Well, I'm out there as a family looking for another apartment, something that's more livable for myself and my two growing sons. And there just seems to be a monopoly from Alta, Midpen, Bridge, Eden Housing, which offsets some of that affordability for what's already here. I'm already here, and I would like the choice to move within the city. But what is happening is I am being denied, whether philosophically or financially. I know there's a law that says you cannot deny somebody that has a voucher, but there are ways that owners can get away with that, get away from that by charging more rent or, having kind of an extraordinary ask about 3 months pay stubs, et cetera, $10,000 in the bank. And so my question is, how do we take who's already here, the poor that are already here, and make it more of a streamline so that the community actually becomes more, like you were talking about earlier, educated on that this is not a bad thing. There's housing here, and I'm all for bringing housing on, but why not help those already living here with, and one of my solutions is obviously having a city department that actually has a wait list and can help people navigate or, mediate between landlord and tenant. There is housing out in Palo Alto that is within the price range of a Section 8 voucher. But as soon as I ask, it's getting a door slammed. I don't want to live in Alta, or, you know, or their wait list is 10 years long. So I guess that's the question of dealing with what's already here for those residents already here living in poverty who, you know, maybe want to move to the other side of town so their kids can go to Palo Alto High, or that's just one, you know, justification for moving, or maybe the landlord where we're living is just, it's untenable. So my question is, how can we help those already living here so that the community understands or kind of walks in the shoes of what it is to be poor and have a little bit more, you know, compassion and empathy, and it's going to be okay.
How much time do we have?
Yeah, we're pretty. So we're at 1, and we had promised to end at 1. So
I was going to say that there are several really good things there. I wanted to thank you, Liz, for
I just
asking those questions, because there's so much in what you just said. It's so true and so challenging. The wait lists are too long. Discrimination against Section 8 vouchers is too easy, and the options for people to move for whatever reason a person feels they need to move for them and their family, which should be possible. It's like should be a natural human thing. The easy human thing to do is be able to move. And you're right. I don't know if I have a 1-minute answer to any of those. Not to mention, you know, the kind of issue of changing community opinion. So there's the community opinion side of it, and then there's the policy side of it, and there's the enforcement side of it. And each of those, I think, need some work. I had a quick answer for that, though.
No, and I wanted to put it out there as something to think about in the future, because as people deny or are so livid or, you know, anti-housing, where in fact the very families that live here are struggling to even move within the zip code because it, you know, the redlining or whatever, the stigmatization, the prejudice, discrimination is already embedded. So then we're bringing on housing, and it just reinforces, you know, that you know, we don't want you here. So anyway, it could be something for the future to address in a different talk. But, you know, I just wanted to put it out there. I knew it wasn't an easy answer, but.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I think like it's easy to forget just how many people slip through the cracks with the current housing system that we have.
Mm-hmm.
If it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and close us out just for the sake of time. But for the caller, like, thank you so much. And we hope to engage with you outside of this conversation as well. And that's good recommendation for future talking as well. We have a Google form for feedback for our future fireside chats, and that's been thrown in the chat a couple of times. Please fill it out if you get a chance. It helps inform how we can make our programming better, more inclusive and accessible. And our next Coho event will be, you can sign up to figure out when our next Coho event will be, as well as future events on the SVET homepage. And I do want to just thank everybody for coming, and enjoy your weekend. Is there anything else people wanted to say before we close this out? Thank you, Cory, for your great answers and for being with us here today. And for everybody who joined in.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks, everyone. It's been great.
Thanks, Cory. Fantastic.
Really great. Will we get notified for the next fireside chat? I just think these are so great. It really feels like you care, and we're all part of this conversation. So we'll be notified, right, for the next one?
Absolutely. If you're connected to our newsletter, I'll put the newsletter form in the chat again. If you're able to look at our website, we can see past videos of the fireside chat.